Call to order the monthly meeting of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District. I want to welcome our guests. It's not we're not always here locally, and it's nice when we are. Thank you for attending. Roll call, Mr. Farrar.
Mr. Chairman. Mark Finkel.
Here.
Albert Hayes.
Here.
David Bergschmidt.
Here.
Anthony Netto.
Here.
Jeffrey Rosenthal.
Here.
Robert Morgan. Michael Clark.
Here.
Robert Leslie.
Here.
Robert Coltan.
Here.
John Hodgson. Stephanie Rizicki. Richard Ferrara. Here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We need a motion to adapt or revise the meeting agenda, and we have a little revision. We have a 5-minute executive session on personnel issues that will take place actually right after the comment period. I'll let everybody do their comments, and then we're going to go into an executive session, which we will probably have votes and stuff coming out of afterwards. So I need the motion to revise, reflecting that executive session.
Make that motion.
Mr. Bergschmidt.
Second.
Mr.
Hold on.
Rosenthal.
I think there are two items, at least based upon internal emails, that need to be added, unless I'm missing it. One with regard to a resolution with regard to the utility charges.
Oh, the Indian Lake.
Indian Lake, that's right, that's right.
And the second one with regard to the Rocker Boulder bid that Mr. Fulton
Is it the Stillwater?
has
Garage.
recommended
Stillwater garage bids.
that we
It was
reject.
actually going to be part of his report, but that's...
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know if it needed to be a formal item on the agenda or not.
It can be, or I can keep it as part of my report,
Well, you're going to recommend
whichever
that.
the board prefers.
Well, why don't we keep it as part of the
Leave it part of the report.
Okay, just wanted to make sure we
So
weren't
I'll
missing
amend
that.
my
So-
motion to include the Indian Lake.
Okay.
Very good. Mr. Bergschmidt, and seconded by
I'll second that.
Mr. Hayes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. I see no guests here, but we do have some public comments. First,
Rich.
Rich? I didn't catch the last name. I can't read the last name. Oh, okay, I thought maybe it was, but it didn't look like that. Okay,
Mark,
sorry.
it's part of the appeal. Do they want to, they can do it now, or do they want to do it? Or they can present their argument now, and then I will, I was going to address the appeal during at the end of my report.
You prefer to give your statement now, or talk to the board now, or wait until he does his report?
Can do it either way.
Okay, you probably, I guess, this is the public comment period. I think we should do it now. Yes?
That's going to take more.
You have the floor, sir.
If you would just stand a little closer, just so we pick you up, that'd be fine. Very good. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank you gentlemen for allowing me to come before you to present a discussion on a situation that is commonly called in our area Lot 22. And I think it's worthy of this discussion to take a minute or two and follow the history of the transgression of how this property has passed through certain errors to where it is today. A family by the name of Passeri bought the home in 1944, and in 1948, Mr. Passeri, who owned the property with the home on it, bought the lot right across the street, which was vacant, and it's called Lot 22. He bought that from Harold Capon, who owned a number of properties up in the area. That was a fee simple transaction. He owned the property all by himself. Immediately thereafter, Mr. Passeri created a deed in which he gave title for a right-of-way on that piece of property to 6 families, and if you can envision kind of a cul-de-sac arrangement up Tiana Road. Now, in that time, right-of-way and easement was around for a number of years and very popular in assisting landlocked property owners to have access to a common ground. The classic definition of a right-of-way is someone needs access, someone has a property or piece of property that they can give to those people for passage. Number three, you have to describe what it is that property is going to be used for. And number four, there's got to be a destination. Well, the destination was Lake Sacandaga. The people in this cul-de-sac up the road needed access to the property. And he created a will, not a will, a deed, I'm sorry, that titled this and specifically called it a right-of-way. And the closing paragraph of the deed, it says that the grantees herein for the sole purpose of egress and ingress into Lake Sacandaga. He further goes on to say that in the event and they execute a deed releasing their interest of the right-of-way, it has to be done properly or they lose the right-of-way. Now, if someone is to convince anyone by reading a deed that someone owns it, why would the seller be so specific to define ingress and egress? Why would you use the term right-of-way? You wouldn't do that. Secondly, there is no mention in the deed of tenant in common, what percentage of ownership, and we are to believe that Mr. Passeri bought this property for a few $1,000s, which is unofficially documented at the county, and he thereafter gave away 6 parts of it and only kept 1 part of it. The people who own this title claim that they were 6/7 owners. Well, if they are, I challenge every one of you people in this room, did you ever buy a piece of property where the seller told you how you had to use it? Did he tell you only to go in the front door and out the back door? Did he tell you you only had a right-of-way? No, he sold you the property, and you had it. In 1957, Passeri, the family, sold the property to a family by the name of Virgil. It had 2 deeds, one for lot 22, one for his house property. That sale was called a fee simple transaction, as recorded in the county, and as responded to by Attorney Springer when he reviewed this case many years later. And as you know, fee simple is the ultimate description of single ownership. If there were other owners in that property, they did not appear on that deed. If you follow the sequence of the next 3 transactions of Virgil and up to Phillips, who I bought it from, the 6 people who were identified in the original 1948 deed do not appear. Nowhere are their names on the trail of the deed. Furthermore, no longer are their names even on their deeds that follow the tract associated with lot 22. Ask yourself why. The reason is they didn't own it. Clear and simple, they did not own it. I bought the property from Phillips. I had the permit issued in my name, and for 1 or 2 seasons I had it in my name, and then the people who were there then, and I will politely look at this group right here, Nicholson, Layout, they had nothing to do with the history of this property. As far as I'm concerned, they're victims of a process that have been incited to have them believe that there's some kind of ownership going on when the documents clearly say they're not. Okay, so then the permits start changing names. Let me tell you an interesting dialogue, and I would take a lie detector test to prove I'm telling the truth. The night I closed on the property, I received a call from Mr. Robert Quatmeyer, who was one of the owners, claiming he was one of the owners, introduced himself as the president of Lot 22 Association. I said to him, I just closed on this property. I didn't sign any documents or see any documents by the Lot 22 Association. Thereafter, the following spring, I get a call from the son of one of the families, Ruggiero, who says the Lot 22 Association Committee is meeting at his house, and they are inviting an attorney over because they want to rewrite the deed and properly identify the 7 owners. I again say, excuse me, I know nothing about this. Here's the name of my attorney. If you want to contact her, go right ahead. That issue went away. Never happened. The following year, Mr. Quatmeyer writes a letter to my mortgage company telling them that I don't own the property that was mortgaged of lot 22. The mortgage company writes back to Plotmeyer and says, mind your own business, you don't know what you're doing, we're in the mortgage business, and we have properly researched this property, Mr. Sanseviero owns it. Goes away. Problem goes away another couple of years. But during that time, there were a number of attempts at the Broad Oregon Assessor's Office, Joe McDonald and his people, where people went in randomly over a 2 or 3 year period and changed the records, and then took that document and walked up to the Hudson River and said, I want to permit my name. And over a period of 5 or 6 years, the permit was issued in 4 or 5 different people's names, of which my name was twice issued to. So finally, there was a transaction with Mr. Decker where he went through a legal proceeding, and somehow the record at the town office got changed again to his name, and I got a letter that says you're no longer listed as the property owner. That's when I finally said, Joe McDonald, who do I call? How do I resolve this? He referred me to the county. The county is the keeper of deeds. They are the vault of deeds, of surveys, of fact. I go there and I ask them to please tell me who owns lot 22. The attorney Springer was quoted in a letter back to me by the senior map technician, Mr. Gregory, or is it Frederick Gregory, wrote me and said, Springer reviewed the documents, and because of the 1957 transaction of lot 22 and the home to Mr. Virgil, because it was fee simple, the track and the line and the flow of deeds remain fee simple, and Mr. Sanseviero, you are the owner of lot 22. I said, thank you. I then basically didn't do much because I was very sick at that time and I was in the hospital and so on and so forth. And we finally got a little gathering with some of the new people to say, let's talk about how we're going to handle this property because there are some very unusual things going on, which one of you were talking about, just typical lakeside politics. Well, at that point, this Decker incident triggered another phone call in contact to the county where Gary Simic, the new map technician, wrote Mr. Decker a letter and specifically said Richard and Carol Sanseviero own lot 22. And in the letter, he asterisks at the bottom the 6 people who have right-of-way only registered with the county. And he puts an asterisk next to 2 names, Decker and Busa. And the asterisk says they may not even have the right-of-way. Because you see, it is the parcel that was given the right-of-way, not the individual. So therefore, if a person moves or subdivides, the chain is broken. So 2 of the people may not even have the right-of-way. And yet, they exhibit themselves as they do have the right-of-way. I then finally say, I'm going to the board, and I'm going to get the permit in my name, which was 2013. And I want to compliment Mr. Hodgkins, because he was the first person who did his job, who literally put me through the grinder saying, who are you? What documents do you have? What makes you think you own it? I spent about a 45-minute conversation with him, and he said, send me all the information you have. I sent them the information from Springer, from Fredericks, from Simic, from Joe McDonald, from the title search company, from the lawyer of the bank, and said, here's my proof. Guess what he did? He contacted Peter Gardnauer at the county and said, who owns this property? Peter generates a letter that says Mr. Sanseviero owns the property because of fee simple back in 1957, and the following 6 people have right-of-way only. So then, Mr. Mickelson goes up and says, hey, I'm going to apply for the permit. And they turn around and say, well, we gave it to Mr. Sanseviero. He says, no, wait a minute, I had it the year before. So in your policy, you have a provision where you give the person who's been replaced the opportunity to appeal to say, hey, it was in my name first. But what you don't have is a provision that if you wrongfully issued the permit to someone, you don't have a provision to correct it to the person who walks in and proves he owns it. So you tell me I don't get the permit, and I'm the owner in the eyes of the county, the keeper of deeds, and you give the permit to someone who, I don't know what they walked in with, but according to the county, they don't own it. So I appeal and come back to you and say, I should own it. And you respond to me in a series of documentations that went back and forth with a couple of very interesting comments. You say that you do not make the determination on who owns a piece of property. Well, your whole charter on the permit process is based on identifying who is the proper owner. And if you can't make that decision, the most puzzling fact to me is, how do you disregard what the county has on file? You two are two autonomous organizations, but you need one another's information to verify. And yet, I don't see any documentation or correspondence that this group, the board, the directors, and whoever the body is, ever went back to the county and said, make sure this guy Sansevera owns the property. But yet he issued you a letter. And you're telling me you don't make a determination. But there's a very interesting sentence in your document that you sent me in the very first paragraph. It says you have the leeway. You have the right and the leeway to give or refuse giving access or permits. Well, if you have the leeway, how do you tell me you can't make a determination? There seems to be a conflict in understanding of what the responsibility is. But nonetheless, at the county level, there were 6 different groups of people who researched this and said, I own it. And in particular, there's one document prepared that took about 2 months to do, where they went through the entire lineage of all of the 7 properties, the 6 plus mine. And my column, I didn't write this, I've got it here, I'll show it to you. My column is named Fee Simple, and it starts with Passeri and ends with Sansevera. The other 6 tracks keep track of every transaction, and at the top of that column it says right away, right away, right away, right away, right away. And here's another loophole. I researched your website, I researched the document you sent me, the procedures on a permit. You don't have a description where you give someone with right away a permit. However, in a document in 2001, and you claim you don't determine, that's not your charter. In 2001, Mr. Lewitt issued a letter to 6 people who said, we have determined that you own the property, lot 22. Guess what? There was no filing, no record at the county. So somewhere in your organization, under Mr. Lewitt's direction, whoever that gentleman is, I don't even know if he's still around, he took it upon himself with a body of work and said, we will make a determination of who owns this property. And you issued a letter, and these 6 people think they own a piece of property because HR says they do, but you people don't even accept the fact that the county says that's not true and that I own it. You call this a dispute. That's one of the words you used in the documentation. Take this dispute to the court. Well, I think it's the day and age when people run to courts too quickly because the responsibility lies in the organizations that taxpayers pay for. That is, the real estate division of the county, your board, should be able to look at one another and say, who has the records to prove they own this, and make the proper decision, as opposed to saying, go to court. Because I guarantee you, if I go to court, and I will go if I have to, these people, especially the latecomers, are going to foot a bill that I can't believe a judge, an arbitration, a summary judgment would stand there and look at the information of 6 bodies of work, tax examiners, a new tax examiner, the county attorney, title search. I did a second title search. a document by the county that keeps track of all of the transactions. Guess how many transactions have been made on these 7 pieces of property since 1944? 33. And in 33 transactions, the names of the 6 people do not appear as owners. I'll be more than happy to go before a judge and present my case and depose the 6 people from the county and depose the title search company and stand there and say, here's my evidence, here's my body of evidence. But to put these people through a costly exercise when the deed does not say, and it says it is for right of way and ingress and egress only. That's what the deed says that they claim they own. Title has been given for right of ways for 250 years. And the thing that's missing here to these people is this is a permanent asset in terms of the property they own because they have a permanent right of way. But they do not own the property. And if they can't understand that because of fireside chat and a lawyer who may say, gee, I think you own it, I say, be my guest and call the county. And I made a phone call 48 hours ago to the county one more time and said, tell me if I'm right. Has there been any changes? And they said, no, there haven't. And yet, this body of work right here determined in 2001, you wrote a letter to somebody. I mean, you accepted some input from somebody and wrote a letter to 6 people that said, we determined you own it. And guess what the letter says? You said you no longer need back access permits. Well, if the people own the property for the prior 45 or 50 years, why did they have back access permits? Why didn't they have an owner's permit? The reason is they didn't own it. So I call upon you to use that sentence that you wrote in the document to me that says you have the leeway. And I ask you to reconsider and take a look at this before people wind up wasting their money and going to court. Because you have it within your jurisdiction to review it. You have it within your jurisdiction to go to the county. You have it in your jurisdiction to ask them to say, please review the deeds. And in essence, the document that tracks these 33 transactions is like doing 33 title searches. It has every name, every parcel, who it went to, and who it's owned. And the conclusion is, right away, right away, right away, right away, right away, owner. So I ask you to put the permit in the proper person's name, which is Richard and Carol Sansevera. And these people will maintain their right of way to the property. But what must be eliminated is this false understanding of people thinking they own something when they don't. And if you bought a piece of property and you had someone have a right of way on it, and suddenly over the years they start acting like they own the property, I'm sure you would be standing there having the same feeling I do and say, where did this come from? And I doubt if any deed of any property you own says and gives restrictions to how you're to use it other than the legal jurisdiction of the state and the government for utilities and various accesses. But nobody buys a piece of property where it says you can only go in your front door and out your back door. When you buy property, you own it. The term ownership, tenants in common, common and survivalship, percentage of ownership, none of that appears. So how do these people determine that they own 6/7 of a piece of property when the county says one person owns that piece of property? So I ask you to reconsider. On a serious note, I ask you to contact the county if you have to, and I have got the additional document if you'd like to see that family tree, the flow chart prepared by the senior technician where he documents it. I also have the letter where Mr. Kloppmeyer wrote to my mortgage company asking them to take the name off it because they own it and I don't, and the mortgage company didn't do it. By the way, the mortgage company was Ambro, the biggest, second or third biggest real estate mortgage company before the collapse. The present mortgage holder of the property is Citibank. They did another title search before they took the property over. My name comes up as the owner. And I went back to the title search company in February after Peter Garnell wrote that letter And I said, one more time, search my property. Came back again and said, you are the exclusive owner. Because the key element is fee simple transaction in 1957. There's no ultimate ownership higher than that statement. And that was made by two different title search companies, two different banks, the two different attorneys at the county, and the tax examiners, two different ones because the first one retired. You got 7 or 8 people all saying the same thing. You have any questions?
Gentlemen? Very interesting, thank you very much. And,
I'll give you the
please.
printout of that, the higher one.
If you'd be so kind to do so, but if you have an adversary, I don't know if there's someone representing these individuals, but I think they are entitled to see that.
Yeah, I'll give it.
Maybe that will help resolve. And I just,
Most of the documents that I presented are in that binder that was put together.
okay, I just want to
We
make
have
sure
that.
that everybody
Yeah.
is on the same page, so to speak, and has all the same documentation. Not just us, but all the people involved. And I do want to make a comment, you're very persuasive in your arguments and very articulate, but I want you to understand that we have no authority as the board of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District to resolve a title issue over that parcel.
But you did that in 2001.
Well, in my own defense, I wasn't here in 2001.
I don't know, you presented that.
I understand, but I want everyone to be clear. Our jurisdiction, whatever decision that should be made, is with regard to the permit, beyond the taking limit.
But the premise of the permit is to identify the owner.
I don't dispute that. I just want you to understand that if there is an issue that somehow cannot be resolved by proof that can be already prepared and submitted, we're not a judicial body that can render that determination.
I'd have to question, the issuance of the permit, is it to prove ownership of the property, or is it to just provide access to the lake?
Actually, if I could
I want to clarify that.
If I can offer this, I will do that. I don't know if the other side of this, the folks were going to speak or not.
Yes, I have another.
Okay.
I can, when they're done, and to kind of wrap this up today, I would rather than wait till my report, I'll.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay.
I'm not, let me be clear, I'm not stating that the permit identifies ownership. I believe that by issuing the permit to the wrong party,
I understand.
it gives a false understanding
I
that
agree.
there's ownership.
I agree.
Okay.
And I want to be clear, my understanding of your presentation,
Right.
you have no implication or suggestion that our determination affects the title issues or the right-of-way / easement issues. They exist, regardless of our decision who gets the permit.
But isn't there an issue here in determining who owns the property to issue the permit? And then the second part is, what if, this is a what if you issue, and I am not accusing anybody of doing anything unethical, immoral, or fraudulent.
I understand.
I'm saying, if they walked in and Mickelson says, hey, I own this property, here's my paper, and you issue it, and then you find out later that that was a mistake, you do not have a provision that says, when we make a mistake, we can rescind the application to that person. However, you do have a clause that says, before I issue it to this guy, I'm going to allow this guy to appeal what we did to him. So you have no provision to escape a wrong decision. And that, to me, I sit here and say, where's the logic in that? You should have a provision that says, guess what? We shouldn't have issued it to Ms. Mickelson, because what did he show us? What did he show you more than what I showed you? And I remember the conversation with Mr. Hodgkins, and I asked him, if you did to me what you should have done to Mr. Mickelson, you never would issue the permit. Because then, that would have been the true definition of a dispute. Because if he would provide a documentation that said 5 or 6 different sources that the county said he owned it, and I had 5 or 6, well, that's a dispute. Then I agree with that terminology. But when there's no dispute at the hierarchy, and you don't correct it, and secondly, where does it say in your rules how you issue a permit to a right-of-way parcel of landowner? I don't see right-of-way in any description for a permit. It's to an owner, to owners, non-commercial, or associations. Doesn't say right-of-way. But yet you issued it 4 or 5 times to right-of-way people. And that, to me, is what I think is a glowing error in the process. Because if it was done properly, that wouldn't happen. And again, I don't have no ill will towards these people. I think they've been tremendously misled in terms of what they own. And yet there's a document in the book that says in 2001, Mr. Lewick determined, and he changed it from back access to owner. Who does that? Under what premise? Because you just said that's not your body. You don't do that. And yet that document is not even on file in the county.
No, my point was to make clear that if there is some dispute as to ownership that is not apparent from the evidence that we will have to consider, then this body...
That's one of the challenges I make.
I understand.
Is that there's not a dispute.
If it were a dispute, we all wouldn't be here.
Let me give you the final analogy, okay? You're driving down a road. You get pulled over by a cop. He walks up to you and says, license and registration.
Mm-hmm.
He looks at it.
Right?
What does he do? He goes into his car, keyboards into the computer, and says, are you the right owner? Name, height, weight,
Right.
registration, everything. If it's all clear, he walks back out and says, you were doing 40 to 35, I'm going to give you a pass. Or he says, you know what, I need to give you a ticket. But what he did was he validated the documentation that was given to him. The documentation that was given to you was not validated. It was validated because of one phone call that Mr. Hodgkins made to Peter Garnell, who issued that letter. And I say, in the day and age of technology, if there is quote-unquote a dispute, at the minimum, this body should get on the phone, just use the telephone, forget the computer, and say, hey, we got 2 people saying they own the property, who's the right owner? Why isn't it done? And I don't call that jurisdiction, I call that responsible interpretation and analysis to make sure that you give permits to the right people. That's the body of work that you represent. Okay, and in this case, it is clear by other sources you didn't. That doesn't make these people bad, and it doesn't make me good. It just means there has been a misinterpretation of documentation, and no one ever took that extra step to say, who really owns this piece of property? And I say that is a responsibility that I don't think goes beyond your scope of definition. I think it's inherent in what you do. Just like the cop. He has 2 choices. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, I know your father. Yeah, I know your brother. Okay, go on your way. Meanwhile, you drive away with false registration and a bad license. That's why they go in and type it into the computer to validate it.
Well, you've given us a lot to consider, and we will. And unless there's anything from anyone else, I'd like to move on to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Charles?
Yeah, Charles Wilson.
Okay.
I'll only be a minute.
Could you stand here, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, I appreciate
I
it.
just like to thank ladies and gentlemen for taking your time for this. I'm 3rd generation on that lot. I don't know nearly as much of the regulations as he does, even though I've grown up there. You know, my grandfather and my father, we used to go over to Virgil's camp, pay the taxes. They always said, just make sure you pay the taxes on this lot. We're part owners. We don't want to lose the right of way to the lake. It was drawn up that way It is a deed, as I was known, and it did say they bought it for $1, and it was only for sole purpose of getting on and off the lake, and you couldn't build on it. Still, we were still part owners of the property, that, under my understanding. All the families, if you look, they're all from like the Mount Pleasant, Schenectady area. It was the Depression era. You know, they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't do things totally legally the way they do things now. You know, like, hey, come on, we'll draw up the deed, we'll put our names on it. Here's the purpose of the deed, to get on and off the lake. I had 25, my grandfather used to have 50 feet of beach rights down the road. He used to go down that right of way. There used to be an old access road on the water to get to your beach. So you're walking in front of other people's camps to get to your beach. We got knocked down to 25 feet. I came here, my wife, with the Phillips that he bought the camp from. Phillips was all in agreement with us that we all owned it. And you guys had decided to put us on that deed, 7 families, 47 feet. We're only talking 47 feet and 100. It's nothing. And we all agreed. We agreed to your decision. And it's been that way ever since, till now. Till now. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a great speaker. I'm not a great public speaker. It seems silly, but I don't even go to the lake anymore. So,
And we live
thanks, guys.
We live
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for?
One quick question. You made a statement you paid the taxes on the lot?
Yes. Since 1948.
Okay.
Our family. Yes, we have.
I'm just curious. I
All
heard
7
that.
of us.
Except for Mr. Seth, I don't know how to say the last name.
One at a time.
A few years ago, decided that we didn't
He
need
did,
to
he
pay.
started paying it.
Right.
When?
But,
2013.
wait
Okay.
a minute, wait a minute. But we have, the Bosa family has paid taxes,
Thank you.
1948,
And so why in 2013 did that change?
because he
He said
decided.
he was so old, he didn't want us.
When did you purchase, Mr. Sansevere?
2004.
No. If you want to speak, go ahead.
Yes. Hi. My name's Michael Decker. Mr. Sansevere referenced during the divorce proceeding when the attorneys had separated, I became sole owner of what's now my home and property. That's when whatever papers were filed with the county by the divorce attorneys, a tax bill for the school tax came in my name. I thought it was the Star Access permit, and I immediately scanned it, emailed it to all the owners, and we all sent the check to Mr. Sansevere for the taxes. That was the last time any of us saw the tax bill. We had paid the taxes. I bought, I believe, in 2001. When Mrs. Phillips owned it, I'm and Ron Phillips, they, very nice folks, we all paid their taxes. They got the permit prior to me. It was individual permits, and that when lot 22 owners was formed and a permit name. That was just prior to my purchase. It was when the divorce happened and the name on the tax bill changed that we never received any tax bills again. Also, before Mr. Sansevere purchased, the Supreme Court, the Phillips brought the assessment when the town brought off into the townwide assessment. She brought the matter, appealing the increase in assessment value based on the Supreme Court's finding, stated that it's not a buildable lot because 7 people own it, and the town reversed the assessment back to where it was. That was prior to the Sansevere's purchasing, so I'm not an attorney. I don't know why.
Do we have
The
all
chain
that
of command,
paperwork?
everyone who's purchased since then, they closed on the camp and said, okay,
We
here's
have
our
we
beach.
have a Supreme Court decision that reflects an Article 15 proceeding that declares ownership on an assessment?
That was to the town for the assessment. So the town had to reverse their assessment from roughly 35 to 95,000. It stated because you know, it's not buildable because it's,
Do you have a copy of that Supreme Court order?
you have
I
it,
do,
Sandy?
I do.
Someone has it.
Go ahead.
There is a name, there is a number. you know.
Has that been presented to the district staff?
I have a significant amount of information here. I've been doing research since September on this.
This was sent to Ruggierios, who the Valleos that purchased their king from. So.
Make sure we have all the information so that when we go over this, we know, I mean, we didn't know about this, so.
I don't know, Mrs. Booster has another paper, maybe you want to look at hers. We just closed in June 14th, so a week got thrown into this.
Understood.
So anything I got here, I got on my own through digging, and I mean digging. I've talked to everybody that will listen to me.
Well, obviously, this board has a lot of work and research to do. And, I don't know, we need to discuss this further.
And also, Mr. Finkel, there was one point I'd like to bring up. On Mr. Sansevera's deed, his deed also states that he has egress and regress. And I can dig that out if you'd like to see that.
Should she identify herself for the record?
Yeah.
And my name is Tracy Metz. I didn't sign my name on the thing, but would you like to see that also?
Do you, I thought you mentioned
I have
it.
seen a copy.
We have a copy.
Okay, Mike, yeah, okay.
Who's the current
And I just
holder of the
when you're done with that, I
All
can get
six.
that also.
I think it's going to,
Including.
Mr. Finkel,
Okay, so
Chairman, I
the
think it'd be helpful
seven
when,
Thank you, sir, unless you have some other...
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Unless there's any other questions or statements, the board has a lot of more other issues, not more important issues.
Can I just make a brief statement?
Sure.
And I apologize. I'm Stephanie Bitter. I'm from Bartlett Pine, Certain Roads. We had presented a letter, which is part of your general counselor's packet, that I know you have, and I'm really just going to make a brief statement that we echo the sentiments that your general counsel has identified, okay? I don't know that you actually have this 1948 deed. It keeps getting alluded to, and the discussions that Mr. Sansevera said, as well as the ones of the representative. And I think it's just important that you take a look at it. If I could, I have multiple copies of it. Go up bookends here. This deed.
Where did this parcel come from, do you know?
I
mean,
I have the one prior to it. I have the one prior to it. As she's
Is it a larger parcel that they can
It is part of a subdivision.
All right, that's all I need to know. That's all I need to
I have
know.
the one prior, right? It's a nice Italian group of folks. Paricci, I think, is the grantor. I apologize if I'm just speaking his name. So some of the things that I'd just like to highlight, this is a deed. All of us understand that the conveyances of a deed conveys fee ownership. It's not an easement. It doesn't identify easement at the top. Mr. Paricci is the grantor, but again, he's listed as the grantee in the group of the 6 other individuals that make up these folks that are part of this Lot 22 owners, okay? The language we keep on talking about at the end talks about ingress and egress. That's the only thing this parcel is utilized for. There's no improvements. There's no structures. It is to access the lake. Again, in a more simple time in 1948 when that was the purpose of. We talk about this language of right-of-way, and I'm not going to give you a law lesson of right-of-way. The right-of-way has 2 meanings. It either means an easement, or it also is known as a fee. The driveway is a right-of-way. I'm giving you that grant in fee, that area, okay? There is unfortunately a misinterpretation by both parties. There is a distinguish as to how this has been interpreted. However, there's a history of how this has been interpreted, as many of these individuals have explained. There's been a sharing of taxes. There's been a use of all 7 parcels. That has been consistent. I agree with General Counsel's position that you guys are not to adjudicate a title claim here. This is not something that you should distinguish who owns this. That's proper for the Supreme Court. If Mr. Sansevera wants to go and have a quiet title action because he believes that the county officials, all these people have opined this idea, then that's something he has to do, the quiet title. But that is not your job. And that is not, the county officials are not in charge of interpreting deeds. they hold those records. So I just ask you to follow your general counsel's instructions, keep the permit as is, which is all 7 of these folks. All of them. Mr. Sansevere is one of the Lot 22 owners, as has always been and as is documented in this 1948 deed.
Counsel, let me make myself clear. The deed that Mr. Sansevere is referring to
The 1948.
is this deed. Mr. Sansevere, have you seen, and is this the deed you've been referring to respectfully?
1948.
June 18th, 1948.
Yes, and the grantor is
Yeah.
Persiri?
Yeah.
That's the Jewish
Yeah, I
enunciation of
apologize.
Italian.
I emphasize the vowel.
I have the deed that sold the property to Passeri, and I have the deed where Passeri issued it to the 6 people, and I have the deed that he sold it to Virgil. Okay? And the transaction to Virgil is the key element because it states that it's fee simple. Now, if it wasn't fee simple, it wouldn't have been able to be transferred. And it does not follow the names on the deed for the next 55 years and the other 5 documents. Why did the names suddenly disappear? Because they weren't owners. And yet, Passeri sold it to Virgil. How could he have sold it to Virgil if he didn't own it and 6 other people owned it with him?
Listen, I think we've heard everybody's arguments.
Although, I would say respectfully, counsel had the floor and I interrupted her. So I want to make
Okay.
sure that both sides, that
Yeah,
counsel
yeah.
had ample
I'm sorry.
opportunity.
I apologize. No, I just want to leave you with the board resolution 100301, which again, general counsel mentions is, and that preference relative to the permit holders and how it's been in the past. Again, in the past it has been this group collectively. So we would like it to remain that way.
Okay.
Thank you, counsel.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Listen, I thank everybody for their input, and we will discuss this all further.
One more?
Let me get together the copies. This was prepared by the county, and it's every transaction.
Okay.
And that's the floor.
We're going to wrap that up. Mike's going to make his report as part of his executive director's report.
Well, I'll just specifically related to this appeal. All right, the board has before them an appeal that is in its 3rd iteration now, or at least the 3rd step. Let me reframe this from what the regulating district's perspective is. The Hudson River Black River Regulating District has jurisdiction over the New York State land around the Great Sacandaga Lake. It's for that reason. The reason we have that is because that's how this reservoir got built. It was an afterthought that the permit system come along, primarily because the residents in 1932 wanted to get to the water's edge, and there was this band of New York State land between their private property and mean high water. So I think it was in 32 when they first began issuing access permits. And those permits were and have always been based on eligibility. Initially, that eligibility was just front lot. Your piece of private property that you owned touched or bounded on the New York State line. Later on, as the years went by, backlot access permits were established. That's not necessarily, I don't believe, is germane to this discussion, but they exist. I also want to mention that there is past practice resolution that's been in effect for many years now, 100301 that everyone refers to, and that acknowledges certain practices of the access permit system, and recognizing that due to the way properties were laid out and subsequently access permits were issued based on the layouts of those properties and the very non-uniform lay of the land around this lake with the bays and that there are certain inequities in terms of the lines and the angles and people being crowded out over time and the fact that properties were subdivided. Long story short, the board resolved to continue to issue access permits to folks that had, property owners that had been issued before. And we have continued to do that. We've also, that's a matter that has been tested before this board for a couple of years ago, if you recall, with a different appeal, on the Santucci, Laubenstein, and Mikulik appeal. That was 2 or 3 years ago. I wanted to bring that to your attention. Now, when we, the regulating district, issue an access permit for the first time or continue, we attempt to determine ownership. Mr. Sansevier is not incorrect. That letter of 2001 that he references, it said we determined that the ownership is such and such. Keep in mind, there was also no opposing viewpoint with a different group of people that said we view this differently and that there's one owner, there's 7 owners. So at the time, it was clear that owner, it was clear in the minds of the regulating district and the administration that the ownership was straightforward, and therefore the access permit was issued to Lot 22 owners. When Mr. Hodgson issued a year ago now, issued the access permit to Mr. Sansevier, the lack of clarity and the opposing viewpoints of ownership on this matter, I don't think were apparent to him. They weren't apparent to anyone else on staff. So that permit was in turn issued to Mr. Sansevier solely, and the Lot 22 owners was removed. The name was removed from access permit 14601. That's what we're talking about here. The rest of the Lot 22 folks appealed that, and Chief Engineer overturned Mr. Hodgson's, the administrator's decision, primarily because of the 100301 past practice resolution issue. But as it comes to me, it becomes apparent that our ability to determine eligibility for that permit is greatly diminished by this dispute of ownership. And that's not to say we have not attempted to determine ownership. Where we're at right now is I don't believe staff or this board can determine ownership, to Mr. Rosenthal's point that it's a matter that either needs to be privately settled, if that's even possible, or determined in a court. But that's a private property matter, and that is clearly beyond our jurisdiction. So my recommendation to the board is until there is clarity brought to this matter of ownership of the private property, that to continue to issue the access permit 14601 to Lot 22 owners, of which Mr. Sansevier is one. The attempts have been made to determine ownership, and it is not clear cut. And at that point, it's beyond our scope or authority to essentially rule on ownership.
And that's your recommendation to the board.
My recommendation is you continue to issue this access permit in its current form to the Lot 22 owners, to include 7 parties, and until such time that unless there's a clarity brought to this issue of private property ownership, that is the eligible property for the access permit. The eligible private property that makes them able to have the access permit.
Any input from anybody here on the board?
I would just input insofar as, reading this 1948 deed from Michael Perseri to himself and 6 others, seems to be a grant of title in fee simple, subject to, in my opinion, a restrictive covenant of use. and access to the lake. No one can build on it. The 7 owners can simply use the lot as egress and ingress from the lake. So I would think the 1948 deed says it all. So I would concur in Mr. Clark's decision.
It's good to have 2 lawyers on the board when you get stuff like this.
Sometimes.
And
2 attorneys on the board, 12 different opinions.
Well, to Mr.
And sometimes us lawyers look for the whole.
Well, to the applicant's or to the appellant's argument that, you know, when a grantor deeds himself back his own property with 6 other co-tenants, I think implicitly it's a grant of title, you know, not just simply a right-of-way. So it's in the chain of title.
Okay. Any other discussion on this? Can we move on to other board business, I hope?
Look, well,
The only thing I would say in conclusion is that the board would issue the determination in writing at some point, so.
Yeah.
I was going to suggest that we at least give some time frame within which. My suggestion to the board members is that we have ample opportunity between now and the next board meeting.
Next board meeting is going to be up over in the Black River.
Well, regardless of where it is, we
We won't
should
be
be
back
able
here
to
in
render,
September.
but we should render a decision prior to the next scheduled board meeting.
I agree with that.
That's fine.
So at least these people can have some understanding.
In other words, within 30 days.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay. Give
Within
or
30
take.
days.
fine.
Okay. Well, we thank everybody.
I want to thank everybody also for their presentations. And whoever said they're not a good public speaker, you did just fine.
Obviously, you're all welcome to stay. I mean, it's a public meeting, but you don't have to when we get to the mundane things.
Wait a minute, I thought that was the way they got to speak.
Well, that's why we locked
They
the
have
door.
to listen to the rest of it.
About that. They're both ours.
Yeah, and one of mine is also
You can keep one and we'll keep one.
We have,
Okay.
we got it.
If you need them.
I think I have a copy of that.
I wanted to thank everyone for keeping it simple.
Yes.
I think she just gave it to me last week.
It's not in this.
Great. Thank you.
I have, thank you.
Yeah, that's why we keep it then.
That's all right.
Thank you. Okay, we need approval. Well,
Let's wait. Good. Amenities outside.
At best, Tony, it's intended to convey title.
Yeah, it says it.
Describe premises herein for the sole purpose of egress and
Well, this isn't a restrictive use, so nobody, not a 1/7 owner could build a camp on it.
Yeah, I mean, but it's
Yeah.
okay.
very clearly
Well,
Yeah.
in 21st century drafting.
Oh, yeah, but it's
read
not,
the third page.
That's why we're here. If it was clear, we probably not be here.
More
we wouldn't
language.
have to do this.
Well, it's a form.
Okay, let's move on. We need a motion to adopt or revive. Oh, no, we've done
No,
that.
we've done
Sorry. Approval of the April 14th ordinance. Excuse me.
I'll move.
Mr. Rosenthal.
I'll second.
Any-
Burgess.
Oh, wait,
Any-
I thought we were going to go into it.
Yeah, I will right after this.
Oh, okay.
Vote,
I
please.
got, what?
Vote, please.
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'd like a motion to go into executive session, and it will only be for very few minutes.
So move.
Who do you want in that meeting, Mr.?
I think to start, if nobody just, Mike, if you would just come in,
Okay.
give us a few minutes.
Mr. Hayes,
And
Do you
I'll second.
you want counsel
Mr.
to?
Neto.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I didn't think about that.
We would go in the taxidermy room.
I want counsel. We don't know, it's executive session.
Okay, we are back in public session, and we had started the report of the executive director, and I'd like us to continue that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see. I would like to announce that our rebranding efforts are nearly complete. To my point, there's uniforms have been corrected, the only business cards, letterhead, our website. No, not that one. And the only thing we haven't gotten yet is decals for the vehicles. It's not been a huge effort, albeit it has been. That's right. Thank you, Mr. Ferrara. I'm just reminded that I don't think we've replaced the board member business cards with the new and improved version, so we can do that.
Well, we won't go to the next meeting until that's done.
Okay.
On straight.
It might be the next 3 at the rate it takes them.
Yeah, I gotta keep them up.
At any rate, that's where we are with that. I also wanted to point out during Mr. and please jump in if I'm wrong, Rick. During Rick's budget discussion, I was talking about the projected increases in health insurance costs. I just wanted to point out that also includes retirees too.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily think of it. I have to remind myself of that because when you look at that number and there's 21 full-time employees in the regulating district, it looks
50 or 60% of it might be retirees.
so. That's my only point in mentioning that is that's just not all earmarked for the folks that work here now. It's some people have been retired 25 years or more. And there's a significant. I think there's quite a few more retired than there are working.
Triple.
Also, we met with Environmental Facilities Corp. A couple of weeks ago. We will do so again this Thursday to further discuss a borrowing for the Conkleville Dam project and also how we might handle Hawkinsville. And Conkleville, in our discussions from the last meeting, it was clear to them, just at that initial meeting, just Rob, Leslie, and I went, and it's clear to them that Conkleville, because of the mission of the Great Sacandaga to not only provide flood protection but also to augment flows, they see flow augmentation as clearly a clean water activity on our part, and from their point of view that all the other wastewater treatment plants and mills downstream benefit from having additional fresh water in the river that would not be there during certain times, thereby affecting how those permits are issued and actually the extent to which those plants treat wastewater. Nevertheless, that is all sounds like it's muddy water. Suffice it to say that the initial opinion we've got is we can proceed with an application under 319 block grant. Did I say that? It's a 319?
EPA Section 319 Non-Point Source Management Funds. It's a block grant.
And the idea is it's made possible by the Clean Water Act. We're going to meet again and discuss more in detail. We're going to prepare an engineering report that we'll submit to the New York State Environmental Facilities Corp. Next month sometime and proceed with that. Now, the thing we don't know yet, and one of the things we need to determine is what's kind of schedule we're talking about. Because these projects, I mean, we were ready to go with them, and we technically still are. Certainly the first phase at Conklinville, I don't mean to cut in on the chief engineer, but the first step is going to be the ice sluice, and it was intended or planned to be done this construction season, which we're into now. That still remains to be seen how that's going to be scheduled. On the other hand, if the submission of that report and then subsequently an application, assuming we're ranked high enough, and they're optimistic that we can be, if we supply all the right information, then may very well yield us significantly lower interest rates than we could get on our own. And a couple of percentage points is going to would potentially make a huge difference in the amount of debt service we pay. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. No, thank you. Lastly, aside from my report, I did, and there is a memo and a resolution in that we provided for the contract for the Indian Lake House. Does the board have that before them?
Yep.
Right handy. Background in Indian Lake House is a house at Indian Lake Dam.
Right.
Oversimplify it. It sits there. We have a part-time gatekeeper that lives there. It's very remote, and it's an old house. He is a part-time employee, paid seasonal benefits and a small salary per year. One of the benefits is the use of that house. The agreement, as it was forged years ago, is good for as long as he's employed by the regulating district, and it spelled out which utilities the regulating district would pay for. Which we have, what it says in the current agreement is that we pay for everything except electricity. I'm not sure why it was done that way. It doesn't seem to follow. What I would ask the board to consider, and that
I can
pick up the electrical costs.
I'll just make the motion that we amend the contract with the Indian Lake
I was
House.
getting too long-winded.
Any other discussion on that?
$1,200 a
That's
year
right.
to a guy who lives in this house,
I mean, we
performs
pay all
a
the
function on a part-time basis. We pay every
We pay all the other
expense because we
utilities,
pay him
yeah.
a paltry sum of money to undertake an important function. And we have respectfully nickel-dime this guy over between probably $700 and $1,000 over the life of this house.
I'm going to assume somebody thought maybe you should pay it.
Well, that does sum it up.
Yeah. I'll make the motion. Then.
Second.
Any further discussion?
They're sick of me now.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So carried.
No, sorry, Mike.
Oh, that's all right.
Is that it?
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Mike?
What are we
Yes.
supposed to do with this?
On those logo changes, does that include the IDs too? We get new IDs?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Because it doesn't have we don't have our old, every agency didn't have their own, because every agency used to have their own individual logo, but they were never on the IDs. It was just the Great Seal in New York with,
I think
Yeah, it's just
Yeah, because
New
that
York
comes
State
from the
employee.
You got the new. Because it's coming from the state. I got the old one. You got the old.
Yeah,
so do I, so do the rest of us.
There's a new one.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
I got.
Yeah.
Still got the big.
Ours
And
doesn't
the
look
two
like
times
that,
I've needed to use it, I forgot
What do
it.
you have? What's yours look
Under
like?
contracts,
Yes, sir.
motion to, we all have here the
Post for that photo?
annual report, January 14th to December 14th. Mr. Clark, you want to address that, or say your name?
You have the annual report there. It's on the website, and it's available for public use and consumption.
Well, we have to approve it. I need a motion to approve the annual report.
And submit it to the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation in accordance with ECL 152131.
I'll make
Thank
that
you.
motion.
Mr. Bergstrasser.
Second?
Mr. Rosenthal.
Any further discussion?
Move.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We need the motion to approve, maybe I can't read it.
The mission statement.
A motion to approve the mission statement and performance measurements. Again, you're on. So it just says your name after it, doesn't it?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Second?
Second.
It hasn't changed.
Any discussion?
Hayes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried, thank you. Move to committee reports, governance.
Mr. Chair and members of the board and staff, before is a resolution, before the board now is a resolution recommended out of the governance committee that essentially puts our MC employees on par with other MC employees in the state. It's consistent with the most recent budget bulletin that has been issued by the Division of the Budget. And I move that resolution be passed as a resolution of the board.
Full board?
The full board.
Second to that motion?
I can second it.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It is passed. Other government, other committee reports, general counsel.
Hold on.
You had a question, Mr. Birchbeck?
Is there a specific date for the?
The resolution would make the date of placement March 12th. The effective
Get that on
date
the
of placement on the 12-15 schedule would affect a move on April 1st. And then as of April 1st, you'd move to the 15-18 schedule,
Good. I just wanted that.
per the recent budget bulletin you were talking about.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that I got on the record.
Kick me next time, will you? Committee reports, general counsel.
Any committee report out of finance?
No, there is not.
No problem.
No.
My
No
report?
action.
Right, no action required out of. Things remain quiet on litigation front. We still await the competing dispositive motions in NIMO's federal court challenge and the Captain Naughty slip and fall case. As you probably know, I prepared the materials for the Sansevieria appeal. We continue to wait for FERC's response on the headwater benefit payments.
Do we contact them each month, or
We do
just
not.
sit and
We
wait?
sit and we wait, waiting for, it's been quite some time.
It's a year.
since-
It's 11
Well-
months.
Is it really 11 months?
Would it behoove us to
Close to 11.
We
send
can
them?
certainly reach out to
What do
them.
you think?
Probably should.
Why not? Let's remind them.
Okay.
Remind them we're still here. Would you?
We'll do that. Regarding the Thompson's use of the ferry at Stillwater Reservoir, they have added us as an additional assured on their liability policy. And at Mr. Moore's invitation, I participated in the Authority Budget Office new board member training, which was kind of cool.
And they have.
Remind all FTS filers to get their filing in by May 15th, which is this coming Thursday, I think, Thursday or Friday. Look for the electronic filing of financial disclosures box on Jacob's website. Does anybody have any questions about their need to file?
For the record, I filed mine in hard copy. I'm old-fashioned. I won't put that information on the internet.
I filed mine electronically.
Fair enough.
I'm filing mine hard copy too.
Hard copy. You-
I'll file it electronically.
So one to go, Mr. Neto, you're close on the FDS file.
Yeah, I'll take care of that.
And Rob, Mike, Rick, and I'm in.
I'm not. I got
Yeah,
you.
he's in. Okay. So,
You're not in, meaning it hasn't been filed versus you don't intend.
Oh, no, I'll
I just want to clarify this record here.
and
Their choice. It's their option.
that is my report.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Compliance Officer, Ms. Zicki.
Thank you. My report can be found on page 51. Fourth quarter utilization was submitted and accepted. We're now in the first quarter of our 15-16 fiscal year. This quarter is looking to be very positive for us, MWBE related. We'll be purchasing or have purchased a Ford F-250 for Stillwater at over $25,000. A utility trailer for Sacandaga at around $19,000. We're now using a MWBE certified business for our uniforms, decals, and patches. Uniforms came in at $1441.71. I attended the 2015 Central New York MWBE Opportunities Expo in Syracuse, and I was able to meet with MWBE division staff to discuss additional ways to outreach and reach our procurement goals, and was able to also meet with local vendors, some we have potential of using. As a reminder, pursuant to Public Authority Law 2879, the board must review and approve procurement contracts annually. They can be found on page 52, 53, and page 54. I am continuing to work with the CFO on our compliance environment, and I'm outreaching to make sure we are meeting all of our executive order reporting requirements. Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you very much.
The vendors that you reach out to, do they have to register with the state as a member?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just not familiar with.
You have me to partially thank.
All right.
In my prior life, I was in the governor's office of regulatory reform, and I was personally involved in the rewriting of all those regulations.
Lovely.
I love that.
One or more ads.
Okay. Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Farrar.
Mr. Chairman, my report can be found on pages 55 to 109. I'll highlight several fiscal items of interest for you. We're coming down the stretch. We finished 10 months, and we have May and June left before the fiscal year ends, and hopefully in June we'll be adopting a new 3-year budget. One of the items I alluded to during my draft budget presentation was the surplus for the two areas, and that's where we're coming up with that unappropriated amount of money that we can use to mitigate some of what would have otherwise been increases in other line items. As we get closer to year end, and we only have 2 periods left, it looks like the 400,000 range, coincidentally, for both areas is probably where we're going to end up, which is going to be, from a budgeting standpoint, as I mentioned, a very good thing for us. The question will be, how much of that are we going to use? And again, I think in the black, 90% or more of it may be required to stay where we're at, or a little reduction. However, in the Hudson River, it looks like, in terms of staying where we need to be in, with regard to the consent agreement, the $2 million and change, we may only have to use half. So we may have an opportunity to take the other half of that surplus and reserve it or do something. And we certainly don't have to do anything right at year end, but I just wanted to throw that out for the board's consideration at this point. Just a couple other things. Stephanie alluded to some purchases for MWBE. We have some current vehicles, replacements we'd like to do this year. One of them is an F-250 to replace the F-250 up in Stillwater, which is the one Stephanie alluded to. I believe we've already ordered it. It's very hard to find inventory. If you can't find the 1 or 2 things they haven't purchased them now, you're waiting until next fall. So we were lucky there. We're also looking at replacing the Tahoe, which is just in almost total disrepair. And we want to replace that with something more appropriate, and we're thinking of a Fusion, which is the sedan vehicle.
You said Ferrari?
I said Ford Fusion. Ferrari. No, I did not.
That's a Ferrari model.
But the Fusion is in a class of vehicle that the Division of Budget has to approve. So we've provided the business case. Office of General Services, OGS, has approved that and has sent it on to DOB, who generally just looks to see if it's in our budget. Because we're not on the state budget, it's kind of a formality. I'm expecting it to be okayed, at which point we will be doing some of the driving we used to do with the Tahoe and a sedan.
That'll save money, half the money out of our
I
budget.
mean, the gas alone. And
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's all I had. If the board has any other questions, I'd be more than happy. to
Any
answer.
questions?
No, I don't.
We might do significant discussion.
Thank you.
No.
Chief Engineer,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report begins on page 110.
Can I just mention one thing I did forget, and I think everybody is aware of it? The state share for the Hudson River area was received.
okay.
So there was a little issue with the transfer of the money because it was approved right with the budget, and on April 15th was available.
No, no.
Should have been available for us, but we got it right. Kind of
Was it cash? We didn't get cash?
No, we did not. It was a wire transfer right to our STIP account of exactly $1 million.
So your report,
Mr. Chief Engineer, I apologize.
Apologies, thank you.
And one more.
All right, as I said, my report begins on page 110. Although still dry, not as dry as the first few months in the year. April in the Hudson River area precipitation range from 68 to about 105% of average. And our inflow to Great Sacandaga Lake and Indian Lake Reservoir was 97 and 90% respectively. So it came up a little bit compared to, if you remember, the month of March. Actually really dry, and dry in terms of precipitation and in terms of inflow. Black River area didn't quite fare as well. We had 70 to 80% historic precip, and inflow though was close to average at 97%. We still remain, since the month, this first half of May has been on the dry side still. We still remain about 2 feet below our target elevation on Great Sacandaga Lake, about 2 feet below our target elevation or historic average at Indian, and about 5.5 feet below at Stillwater. But there's still time, and you never know what Mother Nature's going to throw at us. And it won't take an awful lot of rain. It'll take the historic average amount of rain to really finish off our reservoirs. That is, if we get it, and we get it in the form that we historically do, and that is an inch or two rainstorm, over the remaining month or so. I think our reservoirs will get pretty close to where historically they are when they're full at the beginning of summertime. At least that's what we hope. Related to Stillwater's operation, we've been working with Brookfield Renewable Power, who operates the hydroelectric plants downstream of Stillwater Reservoir, and more recently the DEC, in making releases that satisfy Brookfield's minimum flow requirements. So rather than retain and only release the minimum amount of water that we possibly want to, we've been making releases out of Stillwater of about 150 CFS, despite being down about 5.5 feet from our target elevation. And that's satisfied Brookfield and, more importantly, the DEC's concern with flow in the Beaver River. And despite being down 5.5 feet, that augmentation certainly is consistent with the purpose of the reservoir, augmentation for water quality or other reasons. Augmentation can occur any time of the year, even and sometimes it occurs when we're typically refilling and typically shut down completely. And in a spring scenario like that, which we've had, where we have a late melt and then the melting isn't substantial or accompanied with a lot of rain, you lose a lot of the snow, it gets pretty dry in the rivers, and that's the situation we've had this spring. Fairly similar to, I think it was 2011, it was a similar event. 2011, 2012. 12, thank you.
11 was sky high.
Where it was also a late freshet, and it was not nearly as strong as a result of warmer temperatures and lack of precipitation. But short side of the story is we're augmenting in the Beaver River, and that does have some impact on our rate of recovery at the Stillwater Reservoir.
And we have to be involved with those discussions with DEC and Brookfield in the Black River area and the Beaver River, because it's not prescriptive like it is here due to the offer of settlement.
Correct. The requirement the DEC placed is a requirement only on Brookfield and their licensed projects. Nonetheless, we, being a source of water to help the DEC maintain the level of flow that they desire for fishery, we do what we can. So, it's not
150 CFS. You're not going very far.
Yeah.
Fast.
Right now, it's not negatively impacting the elevation of the reservoir. The extra 100 CFS would clearly raise the elevation of Stillwater a little bit more each day, but right now the inflow is sufficient to at least maintain the current elevation of Stillwater. So we'll see after the rain that we got last night. Maybe we'll have some improvement overall. But next item that I had, I included a memo on Six Lake and Old Forge and our first engineering assessment. We received the final draft, excuse me, CDM Smith's dam safety inspection and engineering assessment. I've included the executive summary of those two reports, both engineering assessment for Old Forge and for Six Lake. I won't go over in detail much of what is included in the executive summary in terms of their findings and their recommendations. It's consistent with what we had anticipated and expected. Part of the reason why we have, at the end of this upcoming 3-year cycle and the beginning of the next 3-year cycle, earmarked, or at least have some idea that we're going to need to make some improvements and spend some money on both of those facilities. Generally, Six Lake has some issues with regard to its ability to pass the design flow. That design flow comes from the DEC's regulations, and so there'll be potentially some changes that we need to make to accommodate and to be able to release that design flow. And we have a similar situation with Old Forge in terms of its design flow, the spillway design flood. And we'll have to look at methods or means to increase discharge capacity to safely pass that design flow. So, if there are any questions specifically on that, I can certainly answer those. But as I said, the executive summary details all their findings. Next item was a memo that we issued after the board package, disposal all mentioned, regarding Stillwater Garage Foundation. We solicited bids through our discretionary authority, seeking to purchase construction services from New York State small businesses pursuant to Article 15A, with the intent to procure and award a construction contract for the Stillwater Foundation to procure those services from a certified minority woman-owned business enterprise. We've gone through the bid process, solicited, requested bids, waited for them. We had some 75 firms request copies of our bid documents. 75
and we got one back.
firms.
For a roof.
That's right. No, this is
still
concrete. Sorry, never mind.
Stillwater.
What's the size of this garage?
30 by 40. The project consisted of basically slab on grade.
They thought they could get away with it.
30 by 40. And
What
some-
needs to be done, really?
Of course,
It would be some excavation, just to level an area where the concrete slab would go. A small Alaskan, what would you call it, Mike? Alaskan slab
It's an
structure.
Alaskan slab with a
Basically
great
a
beam
small
for the,
haunch.
It's a floating.
It's a floating slab
slab.
type design,
Big slab of concrete, 30 feet by 40 feet.
Yeah,
basically.
And
Yeah.
who-
Rectangular.
With the footer.
Some stone, crushed stone underneath
We're
it, some
talking about
Does
drain.
the
horns.
building go up on top of
Drain
that
pipe.
eventually?
For
put it
this
off the side.
procurement, it was only
Just
the
the slab.
excavation and the
Okay.
slab installed.
Okay.
All right?
Not the footers and.
Well, it had just that small haunch around the
Right,
perimeter.
okay.
which
Any,
was-
any question that the bidder may have misinterpreted?
No, it was detailed bid.
No, we
Okay.
had detailed drawings and detailed specifications,
Okay.
as we do with,
Yeah.
typically with all of our projects. And we had estimated the project to cost about $22,000. We received just one bid on April 28th on the deadline. That bid was from Rock Boulder Incorporated. The bid amount was $64,025. Now, certainly Rock Boulder appears to generally meet the requirements for the submission of a bid, and I think they would be a qualified firm to complete that type of work. However, the district staff believes that that bid price far exceeds a reasonable cost to complete the work.
I haven't worked in concrete lately, but I had contacted Rob when I saw it, and he sent me the figures. They missed that concrete by a decimal point or something.
Almost an order of
Darn near.
magnitude.
It's really an order of magnitude.
Yeah. Right, the unit price just for the concrete slab, and it was about a 40 cubic yard slab. The unit price for concrete was almost $680 a cubic yard installed. The material cost itself, delivered on site, and subsequent backup, work that we did to identify the probable cost, is only about $100 a cubic yard for just the materials. So you're talking about $580 for labor to install an 8-inch slab. So, again, that all seems to be, or far exceed the reasonable cost for the construction of this slab. And
So we're gonna end up doing it on our own, with staff?
yeah, we recommend the
Board.
board does not award the project to Rock Boulder, and
You don't want me to.
and that we recommend, rejecting that bid, and that we also recommend, the staff recommends that the district use the field staff to complete that work. And we've already started looking at some of the costs and, getting bids or prices for some of the materials that we would need to complete it in-house, and
Gonna have to.
the more detailed cost for those materials, the pricing for that material is consistent with the original estimate we made.
Just
So.
a thought or a question on the process. So we've reached out to the MWBE community. Can this be rebid?
If we want.
more inclusively if we wanted to?
It could be rebid,
Okay.
certainly.
And the staff is making the determination that's unnecessary because it can be done in-house.
Well, our experience, at least more recently, when we bid for a project like this, and certainly we didn't preclude non-MWBEs from bidding also. They were certainly
We can't.
eligible
If they
to.
wanted to submit,
They could've.
We take their, right.
But the fact that we only received one bid.
Yeah.
Right, it's not, not a
I
good
think it
sign.
might, right, our experience with some of these smaller projects is that we will not see an improvement in the number of bids.
Correct.
If we were to go through the process again.
Demographics part of it.
I think so.
Big part of it.
Okay.
And I think the only reason we didn't really look at it in-house completely to start with was, one, that there's an opportunity to make it, that construction work available for a firm, and unfortunately, I think it's too costly, and there was only one firm that was interested in even at all bidding on work.
Okay.
So I'm sure, does the board need to make a motion
was
on
gonna
that
ask
with
that.
regard
To reject the bid?
Reject the
Cannot
bid?
accept the bid? I don't
No.
think so.
I don't think so. We're not accepting it.
We got the discussion in public. It's a matter
Just
of
no
record.
action on it, right?
Yeah, we don't take any action on it.
They don't take any action.
It's a budgeted item, we can go ahead and.
Okay.
And I think
Any
that-
questions?
That covers the items I have.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton.
Thank you. Thank you for your report on the second dog pond.
Yes.
Hudson River Area Administrator.
Ken Black, too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My report starts on page 151. Couple quick things. The head staff at SFO attended a confined space and trenching training with New York State Insurance Fund. Something that training that we try to get out to the staff every month. Keep up on our training with the staff there. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we are entertaining the possibility now of offering a credit card payment method for permittees, renewals, whatever that comes across, new application, different things come across.
Do we need to?
Part of that process is going through the Department of Budget. Department of Budget, do we have to go through and get a?
It first goes through, New York State Tax and Finance is the administrator for the state for credit card accounts. You have to go through a formal application, which is a cost-benefit analysis and a lot of data collection. Once that's completed, it does go to DOB, who again looks at it and makes sure, and I think if you have an assessment that looks like it might cost you a lot of money, they may have to look to make sure you got budget money to take care of that.
So what we did is we sent out an email to like 1,100 permittees looking for a reply back, whether in favor or not of credit card option. And
The one obvious drawback is, unless we pass on the 1, the 2, the 3% that the company charges, and I don't think it's unlawful to do that.
It's permitted.
It is, that's the real query. Because that's, look, we're a small agency with a small budget, and the permit operating system needs to fund itself. That 3%, 2% out of what we receive is a chunk of money.
What was the reply on your survey?
It's still coming in.
Oh, it's still coming in?
yeah, they're still coming.
If I remember, we didn't ask whether they'd be willing to pay the premium of 2%, did we?
No, some responded saying.
Now, mind you, I'm sorry. Mind you, you're talking about 2%, to throw a number out there, 2% on an average across all 4,700, $57? So I could do so we're talking about $1.50, $1.75, if for the convenience of using a credit card.
Less.
I would be surprised.
Less 49 cents to mail it.
Well, there's that.
still have-
Well, you're talking a dollar. Well, the return is the, what you say.
Right.
So, I would be shocked if in this day and age that the 2/3 and 3/4 of the people don't want to pay online. And I've said that before, and maybe it's not the place for a public meeting, but I have a very clear indication that now the public's ready for it. And I'm serious. My 85-year-old mother texts and buys things online, and I'm not even joking about it. If they're doing it, most of the people out there are probably expect to have the ability. We get asked all the time. We get, a couple times a week.
Even
a couple people that money.
shipping and handling.
Even if it costs us $9,000 in fees that we don't pass back on to the people who are getting the permits, we are within. We could recoup that money by not sending out renewal notices on the actual permit and paying those postage expenses. Right.
I mean,
In our current configuration.
Presently, the way it's.
If we change
In
the
other
way
words,
we do things.
it's almost a complete wash on our end.
Right. Should be.
I think given some of the data we have back to date tells me that you're not going to get 4,700 if that's the number. Permittees paying with a credit card. It's just not the
Well, you're not going to get
You're not going to, right. So we don't know what that number is, but I would strongly recommend in terms of the actual transaction fee that we don't add. I think that's something we need to avoid. And I think it's going to be insignificant. It's going to simplify the whole process. And the most important thing, aside from the fact that we have to go through this application process, is we're reaching out to software firms who can give us an idea of what it's going to take to have the right data structures. First of all, number one, you have to have a secured website. We do not. So that's the first thing we have to do. And that costs money. Then you have to go ahead and establish the data sets out of our permit system access database, so in a secured way that enables somebody to grab only their renewal permit to pay. We've gotten some preliminary numbers on doing that kind of software work, and the low end, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 5,000? 3,000 to 5,000. It could be as much as 10 to 15. You name the number. So we need to get through a little bit of due diligence before we think that this is a slam dunk.
Isn't there a general website you could pay, like fees and taxes to the state through pay.gov or something?
There's also a common, but again, we would still be responsible. The thing you can't get away from is having to establish those data sets so somebody can pay what they're paying for. We would have to do that. Nobody's
You
going
can't link to that site and just have them pay and get reimbursed from the state?
You can do that. That's an option. We still got to get through whether that's in the cards or not, you still got to go through the application process.
Whether or not we actually get this in place for the renewal season in December and through in the winter, we're at the point where we've at least got to determine what kind of participation we're really going to have and what it's really going to cost us and what we're really going to need to do to our website to do it. I mean, we just haven't, up until now, expended that. And among the state entities that do take money for services, permits, licenses, whatever, we don't yet accept a common form of payment. And we at least have to, I think we should at least get to that point where we can make an informed choice.
Which is, again, that's why that application is not just, what do you want to do, and rubber stamp it. They make you go through all that due diligence.
Well, find out.
That's all I have. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Now, on this particular agenda, we separated Black River.
That's all.
That's all. Okay, so it has been.
Yeah, that needs to be written.
Any board member questions and comments?
Was there a mention made of switching the location for a future meeting? Was that done?
We did that. We moved the September meeting to Long Lake.
And you moved the Watertown meeting from December to
Yeah, we've already.
March, right?
Yeah.
Which was
Right.
we're back.
We've already.
We did have a request, I guess two of our staff will be gone for the July meeting. And there was a request of whether we would consider moving that meeting a week.
Sure.
After?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Third Tuesday?
Is that correct? Who's not gonna be, I know you're not gonna be
Ross.
here.
Right.
And you're not gonna be here.
Where's the meeting?
Here, right? Or, isn't it here?
It's over at Hudson River
I believe it is. It
Okay.
is. May and July, what was the time setting?
area. No problem.
So right now it's what, it is 14, what day is it?
It's right now set for the 14th, the Steel Day.
I know we have to make a resolution for the next board meeting, but I just thought.
Ooh, I got. Check. I may have a wet.
On Tuesday?
Do that. I don't know if I do that.
Well,
It might be the weekend.
right now,
It's out of town. That's why.
We're looking to move it a week or a day?
21st.
well, I think a week.
To the 21st.
And that works because we don't have an August meeting. So it's not like we're gonna be having a meeting within 2 weeks or.
Which kind of puts it smack dab in the middle between the,
June and September.
I wouldn't do it.
yeah.
Well, how about the following?
He can't make that if we, he can't make it.
Okay, well, that's a problem then.
Yeah,
Then we have a
that
problem.
doesn't work.
Put it on the 28th of July.
Right, again, we don't have anything in August, so.
It puts-
You're just putting more
28th
distance
of July?
between June and.
Hold on, I got it.
Yeah, but you're making it almost like 6
I don't
weeks
know
and
if
6
that-
weeks.
Right.
It is.
I got it. I'm calling.
Yeah, but on a Tuesday?
I just sent a text to my wife, see when her son's wedding is.
That way we have to have it on the
Well, you don't need to be.
Well, except that they're gone for the week, they're on
I have to
vacation.
send them on.
Right.
So that, the week that we're scheduled, we can't do it that week.
You
Am I
can
right?
thank him. No, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Wednesday, 22nd.
Yeah, I typically go to a conference during
Yeah,
that
I
week.
thank you. Just check.
So where we at? Have we-
So so that week or the 20, none of that week works, or does it need to go a whole week
It
further?
might for me. I'm checking.
Here's a
I don't know if I
thought.
What do we do in August?
Here's a thought. What's the prohibition of just not having the July and having an August meeting?
We could do gasp.
Gas?
Change.
Well, we could have the July meeting in August.
I mean, perish the thought that I stick my neck out on a limb on this. Mix my metaphors.
Does that work for anybody? Do it in second, our normal meeting time, the second Tuesday in August for the July meeting?
So it's the August meeting.
Yeah.
No. I was going with history.
No, he's the one who said have the July meeting.
Rick won't be here.
I just,
John won't be.
I thought I was going to skate on that.
That's why I take my vacation in August, because we don't meet.
Oh, okay, all right.
have you looked at the-
So, I'll tell you what, it is 12:20. Everybody's been very patient, we've had a long agenda. Think about this, and we will take it up at the next meeting.
Sure.
Okay. Which is?
Which is, we need June, second Tuesday?
June
June
9th. June 9th.
And
Inlet.
Inlet, that's right, I knew that.
So we have a resolution.
So we need a resolution to have that board
6,
meeting.
9, at, in, that.
So moved. Mr. Hayes.
Second,
I'll second.
Mr. Nedham.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion to adjourn.
I was hoping we could have the June
July
meeting
19th.
Motion to adjourn.
in
In
July.
January, actually.
Yeah.
Second, Mr. Hayes.
That was right. The wedding's
Vote,
July
please.
19th.
Thank you, everybody.